Hi everybody, welcome to another book taster where we just get to basically talk about what sort of books we've been enjoying. I also would love to get your suggestions as well. One of the books that I've been enjoying recently has this quote that I just want to read it to you, and it's about the will of God. Here it is. The way many Christians practice seeking God's will before they make a decision amounts to spiritual and emotional bondage. That's crazy, right? Because having been a Christian now for quite a few years, it's interesting that when I think about making a decision, if I think about God's will, it can feel very, I think, restrictive and very confusing. What this book does, Decisions Made Simple by Tim Chester, which is really, really helpful, is just to helpfully lay out a way of making decisions that takes the Bible into consideration, that takes God's will as revealed in the Bible into consideration, and that doesn't paralyze you and make you constantly think, I need to hear a voice from God or something before I can make an important decision. I think the book's chapters actually are very helpfully laid out. The sections where you have decision-making and the will of God, decision-making and the family of the church. So very interesting. We are very individualistic normally, and this chapter kind of touches on that. Decision-making and the priorities of the gospel. And then it ends with a chapter that has a massive, not massive for a short book, a checklist that you can just use as a little framework. So you want to make an important decision, ask yourself these questions. And that way you end up making a decision that's kind of God-centered. That's really, really helpful. Now, I think one quote that summarizes the big idea is a quote that's here on page 9, where he says this: "We are free to use our God-given brains to make wise decisions as long as the options are godly, our motives are pure, the gospel is our priority, and the Christian community is taken into account." That's really, really helpful, because in that summary, that's exactly what he's going to explain each step, one by one. How do I have gospel priorities? How do I take into account how my decisions affect other people in the church family, and so on? I think in that, on that note, he does say there are lots of dangers when we come to making decisions as Christians and we think about God's will. One of those dangers, he says right here on page 28 actually, is when we start saying things like, God has told me, and therefore I will do something because God has told me. Listen to this, really helpful. What happens in practice when we say God has told me is that we co-opt God to back up our private decision-making process. I feel God's leading, God has told me, I have a sense of inner peace. No one is allowed to have a say if I feel this is what God wants. God becomes a kind of trump card to protect my private, self-centered decision-making process. Wow, that's really challenging and really helpful. If you want to know what the alternative is to being able to say that, of course you've got to read the book. But as we bring things to a close, you're going to be surprised to find that actually, for a short book of only 70 pages, and that only costs between, I've just checked a few websites this morning, between £2 and £2.65, this book has a lot of helpful stuff to say, whatever your age. And so I highly encourage and commend this book to you, not just for yourself, but for only £2, buy a few and be ready to give it to a friend. That's what I wanted to share with you in our book taster today. Decisions Made Simple by Tim Chester made an impact on my life and in the way that I teach God's will to other people, and I'm sure that it will make a helpful impact on your life as well. See you next time for another book.